Hi, and welcome back to Anti-Politica. It's been a while. This channel gives you an independent Serbian-American perspective on things that are happening in the United States, around the world, and once in a while we speak in Serbian on issues related to Serbia. If you subscribe to our channel, you will not be bothered by too many notifications because we do not make videos on a regular basis. We make them only when we feel that we can say something different, provide a different take or a perspective from what you can find in the media, especially, but then also on social networks. This time, we would like to talk about what's going on in Gaza, in and around Israel. And again, it will be a slightly different take from what you can find on Twitter and elsewhere, and especially in the media. In order to present our arguments in a coherent way that you can follow, we prepared a little PowerPoint that we will open right now. The horrendous violence and conflict in the Middle East is almost 1 year old, and it's a very painful issue for a lot of people given the human toll. And people around the world are worried about what comes next because there are credible threats that this may escalate and become a regional or even a bigger conflict and war. Interestingly, as soon as the conflict started, two perspectives emerged pretty fast, and they're diametrically opposed. On one side, we see people who are unconditionally supportive of Israel. On this side, we see most politicians in the United States, most big media, but then also a lot of independent channels and analysts on social networks. And the argument in the more moderate form is that Israel has a right to defend itself. And without going into details as to what should be allowed and what should be off limits in this defense, to more extreme views that are openly Zionist and on religious and historical grounds claim that Israel has a right to certain territories, and that's where the story ends. The other side is critical of Israel. Some are shy about it, and it's more implicit. And here we include lots of politicians, especially on the MAGA side. They argue that this is not our war. America should have nothing to do with this. And this is somewhat implicit criticism of Israel, and we can detect discomfort with what's coming out of Gaza, the horrendous destruction and horrendous civilian casualties. It's probably something that these people cannot articulate more clearly for political reasons, but it's a step in the right direction according to us. Among independent journalists and among independent channels and on social media, we see lots of fierce critics of Israel, and they talk about genocide in Gaza. They talk about Israel as being an apartheid state rather than a democracy, and so forth. And it's important to note that we see prominent Jewish intellectuals and journalists on both sides and known Jews on both sides as well. This will be important for our analysis moving forward. Our own view is that the bombings need to stop right now, or at least as soon as possible, if unfortunately they cannot be stopped yesterday, last month, or last year. This simply should not have taken place at all on a purely humanitarian basis. There has to be a better way to resolve these kinds of conflicts and even to respond to the kind of attacks that we saw on October 7th in Israel. We believe that if a country is a democracy and values human life, it should seek qualitatively different responses to those kinds of attacks rather than go to what they call proportional response and proportional violence, which in our view is just simply wrong. In addition, and even if one completely disregards the humanitarian aspect of what's going on, Israel's strategy is not working. Militarily, nothing has been resolved. Hamas is still there. Now the conflict being extended to Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, and it's not really resolving anything. So after a year of bombing, Israel has very little to show for it. In addition, The war is hurting Israel on the PR front around the world. Israel is losing support and goodwill around the world, and this is just not sustainable. Israel and its Western allies need to realize that the world has changed. And we spoke briefly in our video a couple of months ago about how nowadays everybody has a cell phone and a camera, and they can record footage and share the footage instantaneously via social networks. So Israel and its Western allies no longer control the narrative around the world, and this is dangerous. They need to realize this and change their ways, because this is leading to a disaster. Moreover, Israel will have to coexist with its neighbors, neighboring populations, and neighboring countries. So this is poisoning that relationship for a long time to come, and this cannot be good for Israel in the long run. So this is our analysis. This is in a nutshell, our analysis of the conflict, and it implies that we believe that the first perspective on the conflict is completely wrong. It's wrong morally, but it is also wrong if one has Israel's long-term interests at heart. So this raises this interesting question of why are so many people in the media and in the political class so wrong? And we'll try to answer at least partially this question in our analysis. As far as the second perspective that's critical of Israel, we broadly agreed that what's been going on is just profoundly wrong. But we want to expand the discussion of the reasons why this is happening. Many on the left seem to believe that this is all about the Zionists and Israel as a rogue state doing its thing. And what we are going to try to show is that there is more blame to go around, and that things are more complicated than that. As far as the arguments that this is not our war and we should just stay out of it and be done with it, we disagree in a sense, and our analysis will show is that in many ways this is our war, that is American war, and that American public and political figures and activists have to play a big role in doing certain things so that this conflict can be stopped. We believe that it's unlikely that sufficient forces in Israel and around Israel are there to stop this, and there is good reasons for that that are historical in nature and that we will go over shortly. It's interesting how many MAGA and left-wing folks are finding themselves in agreement on an increasing number of issues. Let's mention RFK's Make America Healthy Again and him joining Trump's campaign. And another important point of agreement is justified anger with the Biden administration and its failure to do anything meaningful to make the conflict in Israel and Gaza at least a little bit less brutal by withholding some armaments from Israel, if not to outright intervene and stop this conflict. An increasing number of analysts, independent channels, and journalists are asking this question, whether Israel is really a client state, or is the US maybe a client state of Israel? Of course, AIPAC's influence in Congress and in US politics is well documented. Professor Mearsheimer from University of Chicago has documented through diligent research, and it's a fact that AIPAC wields huge influence in DC. So this is something that's being asked increasingly loudly and increasingly frequently. And we want to kind of add a little bit of caveat to this story. The question is, of course, legitimate. If you see Israel and AIPAC having a great deal of influence in US Congress, it's a legitimate question to ask. However, it may be framing the problem in a wrong and misleading way, in a sense that, if you have fever, if you kind of employ linear thinking, maybe you should take an ice bath to reduce your temperature. But that's probably not a good idea. So it's always a good idea to ask a couple of questions of why things may be happening and why they may be there may be some things behind the scenes that are not apparent right away. The other ugly side of this question is that, of course, people asking this question are not saying anything anti-Semitic per se. Being critical of Israel is logically doesn't have to be connected to anti-Semitism, and we see both Jewish intellectuals and non-Jews asking this question, so there are no problems there. But there are stories and tropes that get spawned, and on social media we see some kind of ugly tones added to this debate, which is another reason why we are recording this video, to shed an alternative light on this question of Israel's and AIPAC's outsized influence in the US and in Congress and in media and so forth. There are two big questions that any theory about what's really going on in the Middle East need to answer. The first one stems from our analysis that basically argues that the way this war is being fought is just not winnable for Israel. So why is Israel pursuing this war that's clearly counter to its long-term political, economic, and security interests? Another aspect that's constantly being talked about and everybody's scared about is a bigger conflict between Israel and Iran emerging. And here again, Israel's aggressive posture doesn't seem to make sense, given that it's not clear how Israel could win a decisive victory over Iran in any kind of hypothetical big war breaking out between the two countries. Iran is much bigger, strategically much more deep. Israel is a small country, and it's surrounded by neighbors that are hostile to it and are becoming only more hostile in the long run if Israel is waging the kind of war that it is waging right now. So what's going on doesn't make sense from the rational standpoint, and the question is how can we explain it? It could be trauma from October 7. It could be that the political forces in power are just extreme and blinded by their Zionist goals. Or it could be something deeper. And this something deeper is something that we want to get into in our analysis. As far as the critics of the US-Israel relationship and those asking the question whether the US is really a client state in that relationship, one interesting question to ponder is, well, how come some kind of super organized Israeli lobby, especially if it's a lobby of crazy Zionists, how were they able in a couple of decades to take control of not just Israel, but the United States and so many Western countries? And why would they put Israel itself at risk, going back to the other question? This just sounds too easy, too simple, too crazy to our taste, and too strange, and we want to unpack things here a little bit. Moreover, as we alluded to in the previous slide, is it gets really ugly if you start posing questions about mainstream media, Epstein's Island, and so forth. It can get really, really toxic really, really fast. It's almost like, there's a trap, an intellectual trap being set here. So we want to avoid that trap and present an alternative view of things. So let's look at the relationship between the American empire and Israel from the start. Israel was formed well after the United States became the undisputed leader of the West, and the American empire spent the entire 19th century and first half of the 20th century growing and becoming more powerful, reaching its unprecedented power and prestige after the Second World War. In which its formal rivals such as France, UK, Japan, and Germany became de facto client states. At this time, neo-colonial system was falling apart, and it was being replaced by neo-colonial arrangements. The Cold War with the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc was in its early stages. And that's when Israel was formed. And it's difficult to see how some Israeli lobby could have had the upper hand in this kind of relationship between the US empire that was mighty at the time and this newly emerging state that was being formed after the huge trauma of the Second World War. Uh, Israel was formed as a client state of the United States from the beginning, and it depended on the United States for its military, for its economy, for its pretty much everything from the beginning. So when one has such client state that just has no other option but to be completely faithful, that client state is a good place to offshore some of the dirty tricks necessary in the fight with the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc in the Cold War. And in this kind of ugly war that was happening for decades after the end of World War II, a lot of dirty battles were fought throughout the world in different countries. And when it comes to those kinds of situations, it's convenient for an empire to have a plausible deniability. That is, have some other country, some other force, some other intelligence agency, some other trained paramilitaries, or what have you, do some task and then have plausible deniability. The other, maybe even more important role of Israel is that it sits right in the Middle East. And the Middle East is of huge strategic importance on a global scale. Because most of the oil imports in the world historically and still originate in the Middle East. So Middle East controls energy supply to most of the world. Moreover, it sits right in the center. It connects Africa, Asia, and Europe. And we have Suez Canal with a huge chunk of globally important trade going through it. So those who control the Middle East have a good chance of controlling the entire world. And it turned out very convenient for the United States to have Israel as a country that can be unleashed on its Arab neighbors to discipline them and destabilize them if needed. By virtue of intimidating those neighbors and starting waves of Palestinian refugees, causing discontent in those countries with the government that's unable to do anything about Palestinian refugees and Israel's mistreatment of them, or luring these countries into thinking that they can defeat Israel and then having a war in the Middle East, after which they get defeated, after which a regime change is actually easy and likely. That turned out to be very, very convenient as a mechanism to control these Arab regimes in the post-colonial era, when they could have thoughts about independence and breaking away and siding with the Soviets and so forth. So from this perspective, the empire always needed the most expansionist, the most extreme version of Israel, and could never allow Israel to become a normal country and seek peace with its neighbors. Had Israel successfully done so, it would become less dependent on the United States, and it could not be used to destabilize its Arab neighbors. And this was precisely the point throughout the Cold War. An additional aspect of the story here is that if Israel was going to do these things that will destabilize its Arab neighbors via mistreatment of the Palestinians, causing waves of refugees and maybe even attacking its neighbors, intervening militarily in their internal conflicts and so forth. Israel needed to be shielded from criticisms in the US media and in the US political class. So an alternative hypothesis about AIPAC is that it was probably set up and approved by the empire with the goal of shielding Israel from criticism so that it can fulfill this role in the empire's fight with the other bloc. One unfortunate consequence of big powers fighting cold and hot wars to control the world is that the dirty tricks and the tactics involved and the weaponry that's used in hot conflicts around the world all become more destructive and more dangerous over time. So in this process, as the empire becomes more efficient and more ruthless in controlling its client states, some of the things that are done may become too distasteful for the public at large. So these agencies and services doing this are tempted to protect those from the public by hiding them and, in a sense, removing civilian control to some extent so that these can be used and developed without any obstruction. Mike Benz has done tremendous job recently, and we recommend following him on Twitter or X as an excellent source of the mechanisms and specific examples of how this has been taking place. But the point here is that things that are done eventually clash with the constitutional order of the United States. And there could be a wider phenomenon here. That is, there could be a whole bunch of bureaucracies, not just the State Department that's focus of Mike Pence. It could be other agencies that do their thing and increasingly see democratic civilian control as an issue and a problem that needs to be dealt with. Tucker Carlson calls this the blob. Jimmy Dore, who is a prominent leftist, calls it the oligarchy, and then many have called it the deep state. And it's an interesting question of how deep and how wide this blob or deep state is, and are there other mechanisms that lead to the corruption of the empire? It seems that like all social organizations, like pretty much everything in life, in business and so forth, everything has a life cycle. So it could be that the American empire is reaching maturity in which some things are becoming outdated and some mechanisms of control and exercising power that were efficient early on and helped the growth of the empire are now becoming a liability and are signaling that the empire is entering its late stages and possibly decadence. This is an interesting question for another video, but we want to go back to our story of Gaza and see how this applies to that situation. Even though we don't know enough about the blob and how deep and how wide it is, and especially its inner workings, how it decides what it decides, and how decentralized or centralized it is, much is known and predictable, and we can see it. We can also, with a high degree of certainty, argue that Israel was a natural choice to offshore many of the dirtiest tools and tricks of the empire. And from that standpoint, as we have seen, AIPAC's power was probably approved and desirable. And even some recent discoveries and troubling things that have happened in the United States over the last decades in terms of corruption of the political and media class in Hollywood, maybe it's logical. And maybe even that was approved by the empire as a mechanism of control and reducing the civilian impact on the things that they do. The blob was bound to violate rights of Americans working on projects abroad. We again recommend following George Papadopoulos on Twitter or X. His story is particularly gripping and illustrates this problem of a young American going to Greece, pursuing a project, and then being caught up in a network that didn't like his idea, had ideas on its own, and they basically set him up and landed him in prison, even without him doing anything wrong. So this is something that's a natural consequence of the empire pursuing its own goals and projects around the world. And if an American gets caught up with the wrong idea, pushing something that they don't like, they'll do anything to stop him. And on the political front, candidates who propose and want to impose democratic controls over what these services and agencies do and object to their wars, hot and cold ones, they get sabotaged and they also get set up and they face a lot of media backlash. And it seems orchestrated by the blob. So Tulsi Gabbard is a wonderful example of somebody who stepped outside the bounds as far as the Democrat politics, and she was dealt with very, very viciously and very harshly. And then, not to mention Donald Trump, his first term, and how many problems he had controlling the agencies that he should be controlling as far as the Constitution of the United States. So this is an ongoing battle. And we can conclude that the offshoring of the imperial toolkit and its hostility to civilian democratic control at home naturally made what started as an American empire at the end of the Second World War to become increasingly globalist, un-American, eventually anti-American. The blob is in trouble internally as people are starting to ask questions, including that question of whether the US is a client state of Israel, and which we are arguing here that the problem is actually deeper than that. And it could be that both Israel and the United States are becoming clients of this increasingly alienated globalist group of people who think they know better and are unwilling to cede certain powers to and put them back under democratic control. It's important to note that what was understandable and tolerable during the Cold War, when the threat of communism and Eastern Bloc was real, is no more. There should be an honest and deep debate as to what should protection of the American national interests look like in the 21st century. Clearly, the US is a natural superpower that needs to protect its interests, and there will always be need for State Department, secret services, and whatnot. But these should be under democratic control of duly elected officials or some subcommittees within Congress and so forth. So there are legitimate questions on the table, and bringing back diplomacy, the current approach of just kind of ruthlessly trying to control the rest of the world as if it were unipolar is clearly not working well. And there needs to be an honest and good debate about this. And this is a debate that's unfortunately missing in action. Media are silent, and officials across agencies seem eager to kill any meaningful debate on these issues, and they're bent on proceeding as usual. But that's no longer working, we would argue. The blob, that is, the empire, is in trouble externally as well. And this goes back to that idea of a natural life cycle of empires. As the empire became very efficient at what it does, and that is controlling client states, what happens is that the populations in those states notice that something is wrong. No matter how they vote, no matter what they do, they seem to be getting the same and what they don't want. So we see the rise of populist movements and the Brexit vote, and the empire still has mechanisms to sabotage and keep out of power those populist movements, but they seem to be kind of progressing more and more, and it's only a matter of time before Rassemblement National in France or populist parties in the Netherlands that are already gaining access to power and so forth. It's only a matter of time before they get to power. So this goes back to that idea of a natural life cycle of things that empires do, and some of the tools that are efficient at one point in time becoming inefficient, and the liability after sufficient numbers of people realize what's going on. Another problem with empires is that they typically don't know when to stop, and they overextend themselves, and that signals the beginning of their decline. In the case of the United States, the interesting aspect of the story is that probably for the first time in history, we had one lone superpower that seems destined to rule the world. That is, after the Cold War ended and there were no rivals in sight, it was kind of natural, quote unquote, for the United States to try to establish global dominance. This inability to recognize other powers and the fact that they cannot be defeated is another problem. So we see some of that in Ukraine, where additional resources are being thrown on a conflict that's clearly not going anywhere. And it's a big question mark how many billions or trillions of dollars it will take for the United States to basically decide to seek some kind of accommodation over Ukraine and reach some kind of equilibrium, at least temporary, with Russia in that territory. Going back to that idea of the unipolar world, it's interesting how had the blob been able to turn Russia and Iran into client states. And during the initial period, Russia seemed under Yeltsin and before Putin, it seemed that that was actually within reach. Had Russia fallen and had Iran then been successfully put under control, the United States would have indeed dominated the entire world because it would have controlled Russian resources and the Middle East. And China and India both need energy. If you don't have your own secure source of energy, you cannot be a fully independent country. So had that happened, the US would have dominated the world. But it seems that last decade or so has clearly shown that that wasn't going to happen. And it's fascinating to observe how the American empire just seems unable to recognize that and switch from the unipolar mindset to the multipolar mindset, which is the new reality, and then pursue American interests within this newly emerging world rather than imagining that the world is still unipolar and trying to rule the entire world. This also explains that why China and India de facto sided with Russia over Ukraine. They and most of the world know that had Russia fallen, it would have been game over for them as independent powers and so forth. One upshot of the situation is that now that we have BRICS with its alternative payment and credit systems and whatnot, countries around the world have two centers of power that they can play against each other. So if you're a resource-rich country in Africa or in South America, it's not a very favorable position to have only one superpower dominate the world, because then you have to take whatever that superpower leaves on the table for you. But if you have China, Russia, and the US, and hopefully some other powerful countries that can be fully sovereign, you can extract a better deal for yourself. So it's not just China and India but countries around the world that really didn't want to see Russia fail. And that kind of explains the attitude around the world that we saw during this conflict that has caused so much anguish and unhappiness in the State Department. But from this standpoint, it makes sense. It's also an irony to observe left-wing or people who claim that they're leftists in the United States hate Putin, when in reality, no matter whether Putin is a dictator in Russia or not, it's completely irrelevant from the standpoint of a country in Africa. No matter what Putin does in Russia, no matter what China does in China, no matter what the United States does elsewhere, you'd like to be able to have multiple foreign powers compete for your resources, because then you can extract better deals. So the empire is slipping and is still unable or unwilling to adjust to the emerging multipolar world. What we are seeing could be one final push, one final crusade to try to convert Russia and Iran into client states, either via regime change or outright war. When it comes to Russia, things are not going well in Ukraine. Putin is having the upper hand in that conflict, and it seems that his troops are steadily advancing. And it seems that one last hope for some neocons in DC is for Ukraine to launch a couple of missiles into Moscow and other Russian cities, with the hope that that would turn Russians against Putin, which is completely unrealistic, unlikely. But they seem bent on trying something along those lines, which of course is flirting with disaster and is very, very unlikely to end well. So that's going on that front. When it comes to Israel, and this is the main focus of this analysis, is that it seems that they're desperately trying to start the war with Iran. And this is not something that's in Israel's interest, but it seems that it's a long-term dream of the neocon class in Washington. Another aspect of the current carnage in Gaza and abuse on the West Bank is that this is putting pressure on Arab states around the Middle East, but they seem to be really smartly managing this, and it must be very difficult for them to observe what's going on in Gaza and not lash out. But they're quietly joining BRICS and behaving quote unquote constructively. They're nominally on the side of the United States, but actions speak louder than words, and Saudi Arabia has reached some deals with Iran with the help of China, has joined BRICS and so forth. So this could be the empire tightening the screws, trying to put pressure on these states not to join BRICS and strengthen the alternative bloc, while trying to engineer a war with Iran and the regime change over there. Again, this is highly unlikely, and explains the latest unleashing of Israel to do this. And in a sense, it could be that the Zionists and the extremists in Israel are kind of playing the role of useful idiots of the empire and doing something that's not in Israel's interest, but they're made to believe that they can pursue their expansionist goals in this context. This is, of course, flirting with disaster for the United States, major loss of influence. This is reckless. The neocon class in Washington, D.C. needs to start losing their jobs, and that will be a good sign, because this is not going well. But if you think about Israel and Ukraine, this is potentially disastrous for them. As far as the United States, it's urgent for the country to go back to classical diplomacy, because this unipolar mindset is becoming increasingly reckless and unsustainable. The world may not know it yet, but the world needs strong United States. Particularly bad outcome out of this for the United States and major loss of influence would actually be bad for the world. But there's no telling what the world dominated by China might look like. It seems that Chinese influence compared to the heavy hand of the American empire is desirable and preferred by many African and other states. The truth is that China has its own ways of doing business that are not necessarily good for their partners. China will extend credit and it will build you infrastructure using Chinese companies and often importing Chinese workers to do them, and is not interested in letting these countries develop industries that will sell goods regionally and especially on the global scale. China wants those markets. China doesn't want to import manufactured goods and wants to preserve foreign markets for its manufacturing exports. So there's some long-term tensions that are in the cards, and China will not turn out to be that of a great partner in the long run unless it changes its economic model, which is an opportunity for the West and the United States, especially with its potentially more generous model of cooperation and trade with partner countries. And this goes back to Donald Trump's idea of striking good deals. And you can think of Donald Trump whatever you want, but he's onto something when he emphasizes this idea. And that's an opening for the United States, which might be good for the United States and the world at large. And this is something that gives the world a reason to cheer for the United States and not want the American empire to be beaten badly around the world, despite its reckless behavior in and around Ukraine and Israel as of now. So this seems to be the blob's reckless and cynical all or nothing logic. When it comes to Israel's behavior over the last year, it seems that if Iran is successfully drawn into war, which is something that they have been resisting and exercising restraint to a lot of provocations, and then defeated, great. That's what the blob, that is the empire, wanted, and Iran is one of the missing pieces in the global mosaic of what the empire controls. These are two big ifs, though, with the huge downside for Israel that's the big elephant in the room. If the Israel is defeated, it seems that the attitude is, oh, well, we'll deal with it, we'll retrench, we'll try to control the damage as much as possible. And it wouldn't be surprising if the blob tries to get some mileage out of that very negative or even catastrophic outcome at home, but by blaming anti-war, anti-Semitic, and other voices that are critical of Israel, which is what often happens in countries that get defeated in wars, but don't undergo regime change. That is, those faraway wars, you lose them, and then the rulers may try to blame those who were opposed to those wars for being insufficiently passionate about them. In this view, the blob doesn't care about Israel, just like it doesn't care about Americans or immigrants or LGBTQ plus people. It's all about power and control. And they'll try to extend their power and control to Iran and Russia, no matter what. And if they get defeated, they'll try to preserve their power and control over whatever they have left. So it seems that this is that kind of cold, cynical calculation that they're making. It's very, very glaring how Ukraine and Israel are similar at this point. It's impossible to argue that Ukraine has some super organized lobby to get these outcomes that are very similar to what Israel is getting. That is military support, political support, and things of that sort. So the question is, well, it must be the empire. It's not the Israeli lobby that's making the U.S. representatives, congressional representatives vote for these bills to send billions and billions to Ukraine over and over again. So in our view, this is something that supports the analysis that we presented, and that it's not about some super organized Israeli lobby. It could be, or it is likely, the empire that's behind that well-organized Israeli lobby, because it serves its interests. And in reality, the interests that are served are those of the empire, and what's happening is often to what are realistically Israel's interests in this case. And that's one of the main points we are trying to make here. The ultimate conclusion here is that this war will stop when the empire decides to stop it. Yes, the Israeli lobby and its influence in US politics and media are problems, but we have to keep in mind that this is the empire's war. And the empire that started out as American, as we saw, but then over time became increasingly alienated, globalist, and anti-American. So it's important to realize that fighting AIPAC is not fighting Israel per se, but trying to eliminate one of the many tools that the empire has at its disposal and as a control mechanism. Many have been very critical of Israel and the fact that a majority of Israelis may be very aggressive and hostile to the Palestinians. But it's important to keep in mind that this is largely a product of decades of the empire's meddling and social engineering in Israel and encouraging of the most extreme elements, because that was simply in the interest of the empire. Empire never wanted Israel to become a normal country and seek peace with its neighbors. Anti-Semitic tropes are dangerous and lead us astray. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, may sound catchy and just to many critics of Israel. But in reality, this alienates moderates and plays into Zionists' hands and prolongs the agony. So just like Arab states are exercising restraint, just like Iran is exercising restraint, leftists in the United States should maybe temper their rhetoric when it comes to Israel and the Palestinian cause. It is difficult emotionally given what we see out of Gaza, but one has to be careful and not try to make things worse than they have to be. Ultimately, peace and security for both sides are the only solution. Not all historical injustices can be corrected. There has to be some compromise that's fair. And we don't know the details of what that looks like, but maximalist goals from either side are not helpful, especially in this moment when what's going on needs to stop as soon as possible. Of course, what's going on in Gaza and now southern Lebanon is only one part of the problem. And the real battle will be to deal with this thing called the blob, the oligarchy, the deep state, or the empire that needs to be put back under civilian democratic control. And this will be a larger long-term battle that is ahead of us, and we'd better get ready and recognize it as such. Of course, we also have to keep in mind that the United States is a natural superpower that will always have to protect its interests around the world, and hopefully it can transform its diplomatic apparatus into something that does just that instead of what it is doing right now. So this will require serious discussion and careful re-engineering of things, and rather than simply blowing up everything and hoping for the best. The vote for the money for Ukraine is a very good indicator of how deep the problem is. The only real resistance so far in Congress has come from the MAGA side of the Republican Party. And no matter what you think of them, this is our best hope, and they need to be supported. So a strategic vote for MAGA candidates, primarying rhinos within the GOP, and sometimes even voting for good Republican candidates as opposed to established Democrat candidates, even in blue states and blue congressional districts, is something that we need to consider. So an appeal to the left wing to be realistic and vote for people who seem serious about putting the intelligence state or the blob back under democratic control. So representatives such as Matt Gaetz of Florida, Thomas Massey. In the Senate, we have Ron Johnson. There are positive figures out there. Do your own research. And the important thing to note is that not all of them are the same. Many are willing to fight the fight and do positive things. As far as Trump is concerned, he's not perfect, clearly, but who is? And if you're on the left, think about why there must be some reasons why the blob hates Donald Trump so much and why it is so unanimously behind Kamala Harris. If somebody gets their full support, that's clearly a bad sign. So here, even if you think about a choice between one poisoned apple and the other one that might be but might not be as poisoned, which one do you pick? So again, something that we will all have to decide for ourselves. The best thing one can do to fight the blob is to encourage everyone they know in Ohio 7 to vote for people like Dennis Kucinich in that particular district, but also elsewhere. And if you really, really want to stick it to the blob, if you know somebody in Louisiana, District number 4, beg them and try to convince them to take part and try to primary the Republican Speaker of Congress, Mike Johnson, by voting for Josh Morat, who is a MAGA candidate. You have his handle on Twitter here, and you may want to follow him. And finally, no matter in which district you are, do your own research and try to vote for independents and or MAGA candidates that seem promising in this idea of fighting the blob and changing things in DC. Of course, things can never be perfect. Sometimes you end up being wrong, but as long as you invest good effort and try to do your best, change seems to be possible. So with that, let me close this PowerPoint. So this was our thinking about Gaza and Israel in the wider context of the empire. Hopefully you found this to be interesting food for thought regarding this issue. We touched upon other fascinating subjects, such as what the United States diplomacy and role in the multipolar world should look like. And the other one is, of course, the size of the blob and its inner workings. And hopefully we'll have something to say about those issues at some point in the future. So till then, take care and try to fight the blob within your means and do your research and be a good citizen. Take care. Thank you.